Hello. Glad you're here. How are you? My name's Chris, and this is the Podcast Engineering Show. We talk about audio production for podcasts. I produce podcasts, and I also teach at Podcast Engineering School. And on this show, we alternate between interviews. So I do some interviews, and then I also do episodes like the one we're going to do today, where I cover a bunch of the little daily goody blog posts that I write. So it's a bunch of little tips. Actually, we're going to cover 9 tips in this episode. And if you want to receive these daily goodies in your email, you can sign up. Just go to podcastengineeringschool.com. And of course, the next semester of Podcast Engineering School, you know when that starts, right? Actually, January 11th, 2022. And just FYI, for those of you who've been listening to the show for a while, I'm recording today with my vintage RE20 into my Apollo X4 interface. And I'm using the API preamp. And I'm using the LA2A compressor. And I'm not going to do any real post-production to it. I might, I'll obviously level the entire episode to the proper LUFS level, but I'm actually not going to go crazy with, using more compressors and EQs and stuff. So I just wanted you to hear this is the sound. So, all right, the daily goodies we're going to cover today are ones that I published between April 9th and April 28th of this year, 2021. So the first one is, instead of deleting ums, you could ... Yeah, so instead of deleting ums, you could silence them. I don't know if you ever thought of that. It doesn't always work, but let me explain. So obviously, if you're cutting out ums, you could just delete the entire That's fine. But sometimes when you delete an entire it actually messes up the pacing and the natural flow of the person speaking. And so it just makes it sound really weird. And then, of course, we don't want to do that as podcast producers and editors because that's going to basically disrupt the listener, right? They're going to be like, wait, what was that? That was weird. So anyway, you can just silence ums and just leave that silent space in there. And one thing you can do with that silent space is something I do often is delete about half of that silent space. And then usually that makes the timing sound natural. But here's one big beware. If you're editing audio that has a lot of background noise, like if there's something, a fan on in the room or an air conditioning, some background noise that's significant, if you create a little space of silence, that silence will stick out like a sore thumb. And so, so what you can do is you can replace that silence with room tone. And if you don't know what room tone is, basically when you're recording, when a podcast is being recorded, there are inevitably, especially at the beginning and at the end, there might be some space, like maybe 3 seconds or 5 seconds where no one is speaking, but the recording is happening, right? And so what you can do is take some of that, we call that room tone. It's like, it's the background noise from everyone's microphone, but no one's actually talking. So you can just edit, you can take a piece of that room tone and put it in, really, you could put it anywhere you want in the episode. And what that'll do is it'll, that background noise will remain constant, and then the listener will not be interrupted or agitated or confused. So, all right, well, there you go. So let's get to the next daily goodie. Using a multiband compressor on a track containing 2 or more participants. Okay, using a multiband compressor on a track containing 2 or more participants. Now, let's just say what needs to be said up front, that in professional audio production, you never want to record more than one person on an individual track, right? You don't want to record 2 or 3 people on the same track because it makes it very hard to process all 3 voices on one track. because inevitably on each voice, there will be something different that you want to fix. So, for instance, let's just say two people were recorded on the same track. But let's say one participant has pretty nasty sibilance, and you would love to use a de-esser to remove some of that sibilance. But guess what? If you use a de-esser, you're also going to be de-essing the other participant who does not need to be de-essed, right? So the person who does not need the de-essing, they're going to get de-essed, and now their voice is going to sound more dull because of it. So it's hard to fix mistakes, and it's hard to mix, using EQs and compressors if there's two or more people on the same track. So that's why this post is all about using a multiband compressor. And I forgot to mention, all the links to all the specific posts are going to be in the show notes. So in the show notes, if you want to see the actual post of anything I'm talking about, the link is in the show notes. So the reason a multiband compressor can sometimes be a really good tool to use on a track containing two or more participants is that, a multiband compressor compresses different frequency ranges. And so, for instance, if someone is sibilant, you can set the sibilant range, which is on average between 5 and 7 kilohertz, or maybe even somewhere between 4 and 10 kilohertz, somewhere in there. The sibilance is different for every person. But in the multiband compressor, you can actually compress those frequencies a little bit so that when the person with sibilance speaks, it will trigger the compressor to compress and reduce those frequencies. But then the other participant who does not have sibilance, it won't trigger the multiband compressor to do anything. So pretty handy. That also, and obviously this also works in all the other frequency ranges, like the low mids or the mid range, or even the lows and the highs, right? It's really good. So multiband compressors are pretty handy, actually. If you're producing professional audio, I would suggest you have a multiband compressor. My favorite one is the FabFilter Pro MB, which is really, really awesome. And in the post, I talk about this one episode where I had to process two different voices on the same track. And what I did was I used a multiband compressor, but I used basically from 15 kilohertz and above, I set compression in that frequency range, because one of the participants, those very high frequencies of one of the participants was kind of annoying, but the other participant was fine. So again, it's a good way to sort of even out the frequencies if two or more people are recorded on the same track, which again, you should try never to do. I mean, sometimes you have to do what you have to do, but okay, next daily goodie. When your client saves money by producing some episodes themselves. When your client saves money by producing some episodes themselves. So for those of you editing for clients, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but it's happened to me, where some clients will actually offer to do the editing on their conversations, and so that I don't have to do it. In those cases, what I do is I clean up the interview, and I mix the interview, and I process all the different participants, and I basically mix it down, and then my client would take that audio, and then they would go through and make all the edits. So with one of my clients, this is how we did things, and it worked out fine. Although the thing is, you have to beware if your clients are doing their own editing. You may want to just review the quality of their editing, because I know my client who was editing their own podcast, some of the edits were not good, not good, including things like different voices being at different volumes. Although for my client, I already told you that I I mixed it properly, so that was not an issue in my case. Voices not being EQ'd well, if at all. Here's a big one. Editing out sections of a voice which already had music underneath it. So even in the intro, my client would cut out some things and there's music under it. So when they made an edit, like the music would skip, and it was very distracting and, not the end of the world, but certainly not optimal, right? And even if they are even doing the music, if their music fades might not be that good. And the big one, of course, is edits that sound very unnatural, including, cutting breaths in half and just not making clean edits, right? So, yeah, so things to be aware of. And for my client, I actually did offer to help them improve their skills. And I offered several times, but they never took me up on the offer, which means that either they didn't understand what I was talking about when I said, hey, look, some of the edits you're making are not, the cleanest edits I've ever heard. Maybe they didn't believe me or they didn't care. And so therefore I didn't care. It's like, okay, if you want your episode to go out like that, that's it. That's fine. If you want that, it's your show. All right. So let's move on to the next daily goodie, first we're going to stop at, this is an episode from a previous episode, number 215, with Matt Powell, who was the senior audio engineer for mission.org. That was a pretty cool episode. I don't know if you heard that. And by the way, I don't know if, if you're a new listener, this is episode, 227? Yeah, this is episode 227. So sometimes I think about it like if you're new here, there are so many amazing interviews I've done. So just feel free to go back and check out previous interviews. Okay, next daily goodie, a handy service called Capitalize My Title. Yeah, so this is actually a website and it's free and it's called Capitalize My Title. I think it's actually, capitalizemytitle.com. And it's really cool because for the title, by the way, this has nothing to do with audio production, but this is such a handy little tool for me that I wanted to share it. And especially if you're producing podcasts for clients, they might give you a title of the episode, but they don't always capitalize it properly for a formal title, right? So this website's awesome. You just copy the text and you paste it into this website, just this little text box, and it immediately, you can choose title case, which means it's for a title, and you can also choose whether you AP or Chicago or the New York Times, because each capitalizes their titles slightly differently. So, and then once you paste it in there, it'll immediately capitalize it as per the settings you have on the screen. And then you just copy it again and you paste it back into the title of the episode. So I've found that very helpful. I know it's a little small thing and maybe you already have a way of doing that, or maybe you know how to actually capitalize titles, but I don't know the rules, so I just use this handy site. So next daily goodie. Oh my goodness. I just saw the picture of this microphone. My dream microphone for recording at live events. Yeah, so for recording at live events, which I don't do much of, honestly, which is why I have not bought this microphone yet. The other reason is that it costs about $1,200. But this is such an awesome microphone. It's called the Yellowtech IXM. And you can actually get different heads with it, with different polar patterns, like cardioid or supercardioid or omnidirectional. And they actually have several premium heads, which are, higher quality, which is what I would, if I was going to buy this, I would buy a premium head as well. And I've researched these mics and I've read the reviews and everybody loves them. And so here's the cool thing about the mic. I want to get to this as quick as I can. This is a microphone, but it literally records right into the microphone. So it has the form factor of a regular handheld microphone, but inside the mic, it has a digital recorder. So you don't need any cables or anything. You just literally on the mic itself, you press record, and then you just hold the mic and talk to people and record audio, and you can walk around, and it's not wireless, so you don't have to worry about any wireless static or nonsense like that. So it's just, again, capturing audio when you want to just hold a mic and walk around and interview people on the street or at an event or anything. Really pretty cool. I mean, someday, if I ever need to record audio at a live event, I would love to buy this and use it. But it's one of those things where I haven't needed it yet, so I haven't bought it because I'm not independently wealthy yet. Although Bitcoin, actually today, which by the way is October 20th, 2021, Bitcoin made or surpassed its previous all-time high today. So anyway. And real quick, if you're into crypto, I started a new show with my buddy Mike. It's called Two Guys Talking Crypto. Yeah, Two Guys Talking Crypto. And right now it's on YouTube. That's our main. Well, so we're doing it with video, but we are going to make it an audio podcast as well very soon. But check it out on YouTube. Two Guys Talking Crypto. And by the way, it's not a expert crypto show. Neither of us is experts, so we're just talking crypto to the average person and figuring stuff out and all that. So anyway, okay, next daily goodie. Let your hardware breathe. Yeah, so I included an image on this post, so you might want to go to the post, and you'll see I have my channel strip, which is sitting on a desk. I would love to have it, in a rack-mounted rack or something, but I don't. It's just that's like the only rack mount piece of gear I have, so I just kind of set it on my desk. And actually, since I've been using, for the past couple months, I've been using my new Apollo X4 interface. I haven't been using my channel strip, so it's just sitting over there. Anyway, my channel strip is sitting on the table, and on top of it, I put my Sound Devices Mix Pre 6, and I also put my old monitor controller, so it's like a volume knob to control the volume of my monitors. And what I made sure to do is, instead of putting, the things that are sitting on top of my channel strip, they're not sitting flush with on top of my channel strip. I use these little rubber feet to sort of raise each of these things up, a half inch, around a half inch. So what that does is it leaves a space between the equipment, and that's really important for physical equipment because physical equipment can get warm, and if there's several pieces of physical equipment sitting on top of each other, like the combined heat of all of them will make them all much hotter. So you don't want to. You want to give some air in between all the pieces of gear so that the air can move and sort of. The heat can be dissipated through those gaps of air. So anyway, check out the picture. It's fairly interesting, but just a good thing to know about audio gear is that especially when gear gets warm, you don't want to put a bunch of gear on top of each other because it might get too warm, and then it might eventually cause a problem with some of the gear. So, okay, next daily goodie is a plug-in, the AMEK EQ200. Yeah, this is a really expensive EQ. It's the AMEK EQ200. It's you can get it from Plug-in Alliance. It's a $400 EQ, okay? And so, look, it's not really necessary for podcast production, obviously, clearly, frankly. Okay, but, of course, a crazy person like me, I love awesome plugins, and this EQ is really awesome. And it's awesome in a different way than, for instance, the FabFilter Pro Q3, which the Pro Q3 is an amazing EQ, and also it's very visual. And podcasters love, or I should say, people who are not audio engineers, they love the more visual aspects of the FabFilter Pro Q3. Because not only can they hear what they're doing, but they can see what they're doing, and they can see what they're hearing because the FabFilter sort of gives you a frequency readout of what's playing. So it's really, really helpful. So this AMEK EQ200 is not like that. It's an old school EQ with just knobs on the front. So, but anyway, it's great. It's based off the classic GML 8200 and also vintage Soundtech EQs. And it has some really, really cool features, but I'm not gonna get too much into it because it is sort of this really expensive EQ. But I do love it. And of course, one of the reasons I love it is because I am, playing some guitar recently. I bought an acoustic guitar about a year ago, and I'm writing some riffs and I'm still writing songs. And so when I'm working on music is where, for instance, a really expensive EQ will come in more handy, right? So in essence, I didn't buy that EQ just for podcasting. And I don't even use it all the time with podcast production. But anyway, all right, let's move on to the next one. Oh yeah, here we go. You ready? Mailing microphones to podcast guests. Yeah, mailing microphones to podcast guests. Okay, so this is something a lot of podcasters think of on their own. So a lot of podcasters, when they're starting an interview show, they very soon realize that most of the time their guest's audio is terrible because they don't have a microphone. They don't know how to use earbuds properly. They don't know how to configure their computer properly. They're not in a quiet space. They're not in a decent room with maybe some carpeting and some, sound absorbing materials, right? And that we shouldn't expect that as podcast producers and editors, right? Because normal people are just normal people. So a lot of people get the idea like, hey, what if I buy a microphone and what if I, buy a USB microphone and I just ship it to the guest and then they can receive it in the mail. They can plug it into their computer and then I can interview them and they can actually speak into a real microphone. And so, okay, intellectually, that sounds great. The pros are that the guest doesn't have to own or buy a microphone. And also the guest's audio recording will sound good. Okay. But there are a lot of cons. Like those are the two pros. And there are, how many cons do I have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There are 7 cons. Let me give you the cons. And by the way, I'm not saying you shouldn't do this. I'm just telling you the pros and cons so then you can make an informed decision if you ever want to do this or not. So the negative sides of doing this are helping each guest set up the microphone properly and adjust their computer's audio settings can sometimes be a major task. Yeah, so don't forget, the person who's going to plug in this mic, they don't know anything about audio or mics or sound settings in their computer or anything. You might have to walk them through every little tiny setting. And trust me, I've done that a million times. It can be very, very annoying. The next con, what about a stand for the microphone, right? So if it's a USB mic, let's just say it's an ATR 2100, are you going to ship a stand as well? Or are they going to hold it in their hand, which is ridiculous. You should never ask someone to hold a microphone for the whole interview. So that's a good question. Next one, if the guest is in a bad sounding room, then their audio will not sound great even with a good microphone. That's a minor one. Okay, next one. The host that's mailing out the microphones is going to have to keep careful notes about who has their microphone or microphones. Like, where did they ship it? Who has it? Does Joe still have it? Did Joe ship it back? Because I have to send it to Mary. You're going to have to literally keep track of this. Again, maybe not the biggest deal in the world, but okay, next con is the guest will have to go through the trouble of mailing the microphone back. Okay. Also the shipping costs, right? It's going to cost you money to ship the mic, right? So if you know anything about podcasters don't want to spend any money, right? I mean, podcasters are renowned for being cheap. Everybody wants free hosting. They don't want to even buy a real microphone for themselves because, can't I just use my earbuds? And, so, okay, so maybe you want to do shipping costs or not. I don't know. Also, audio equipment can be damaged in the shipping process, right? What if the mic comes back to you and it's damaged and now you got to buy a new one? So was it worth it then? So anyway, those are a lot of the things to consider if you're thinking about buying microphones and shipping them out to your guests. All right, and this is the last daily goodie. Recording interviews at an organization's annual conference. It's funny, a lot of times in the same episode like today, 2 of the daily goodies I covered have to do with on-location recording, right? With the Yellowtech microphone, and now this one, recording interviews at an organization's annual conference. So, first of all, this has happened. I've done this several times with clients, right? My client will have an annual conference, and it's like big conferences for companies are a great opportunity to capture audio interviews with a lot of the company's employees, because usually a lot of the company's employees are attending the event, and then companies can actually record 6 episodes or 8 episodes or 12 episodes on location while everyone's there. They can just take turns going into like a room. Oop, I just bumped the mic. They can take turns recording interviews over a 3-day conference, right? It's a really great way for companies to generate a bunch of content easily, right? Because everyone's there, and it's great. So I've done it. It works really well. I even did it for one client who ended up asking me, because they wanted to change hosts of the show, and they didn't have a new host yet. So they asked me if I would literally just conduct the interviews, which I did. But, it's not as good as if they found the right person to be the host. So I kind of filled in. But anyway, those are good services you can offer companies, right? Because you can be the podcast engineer who's on site recording these interviews and capturing them. So, all right, well, listen, I appreciate you. I appreciate you listening. I appreciate you taking the time to learn, to gain more skills for audio production, and to gather more knowledge. Let me tell you something. Learning audio production is one of the skills in life that translates to different areas. Even if it's, setting up a video camera for a relative, or listening to music in your car, you'll be able to EQ it a little better. If you ever do video, audio is a huge part of video. So congrats to you for listening to this show and continually improving your audio skills. And before I sign off, I just wanted to mention, if you are a podcast editor or producer and you want to get new clients at higher rates, I actually created a small course called Getting New Clients at Higher Rates. And it's very targeted. And let me tell you something. If you're producing audio for clients, there are so many potential clients out there, and you can definitely raise your prices and find new clients and earn a lot more money. You can definitely do it. I'm dead serious. Now, it's going to take some work. You're going to have to, you're going to have to move and shake a little bit, but I'm telling you, the business is out there. It's there for you. It's waiting for you. And if you do it the right way, like I teach in this little mini course, you can really get a bunch of new clients at a much higher rate, and you could make a career out of producing podcasts like I've done. So, all right. Well, that's it. Thanks for listening, everybody. We'll see you next time. I got to find someone to interview. Oh, I actually have a few people who have emailed me. So if you ever think you know of someone who would be a great guest for me to interview, send me a note through the website, podcastengineeringschool.com. All right. We'll see you next time. Bye.